Hi, my name's Karen Kolbe, and I'm coming to you today as Mother Goose. I brought my friend Feathers along with me. Feathers the goose loves to hear stories read to her, and I like to read. And boys and girls, I hope you like to listen to stories too. This story is called The Velveteen Rabbit. Maybe you've heard it before. Let's see what we're going to read about the Velveteen Rabbit. There was once a Velveteen Rabbit, and in the beginning, he was really splendid. He was fat and bunchy, as a rabbit should be. His coat was spotted brown and white. He had real thread whiskers, and his ears were lined with pink satin. On Christmas morning, when he sat wedged in the top of the boy's stocking, with a sprig of holly between his paws, the effect was charming. There were other things in the stocking, too, like nuts and oranges, and a toy engine, and chocolate almonds, and a clockwork mouse. But the rabbit was quite the best of all. For at least 2 hours, the boy loved him. And then aunts and uncles came to dinner, and there was a great rustling of tissue paper and unwrapping of presents. And in the excitement of looking at all the new presents, the Velveteen Rabbit was forgotten. For a long time, he lived in the toy cupboard or on the nursery floor, and no one thought much about him. He was shy, and being only made of velveteen, some of the more expensive toys quite snubbed him. The mechanical toys were very superior and looked down on everyone else. They were full of modern ideas, and they pretended that they were real. The model boat, who had lived through 2 seasons and lost most of his paint, caught the tone from them and never missed an opportunity of referring to his rigging in a technical term. The rabbit couldn't claim to be a model of anything, for he didn't know that real rabbits existed. He thought they were all stuffed with sawdust, just like he was. And he understood that sawdust was quite out of date and should never be mentioned in modern circles. Even Timothy, the jointed wooden lion, who was made by disabled soldiers and should have broader views, put on airs and pretended he was connected with the government. Between them all, the poor little rabbit was made to feel very insignificant. The only person who was kind to him at all was the Skin Horse. The Skin Horse had lived longer in the nursery than any of the others. He was so old that his brown coat was bald in patches and showed the seams underneath, and most of the hairs in his tail had been pulled out. He was wise, for he had seen long succession of mechanical toys arrive to boast and swagger, and by they would break their mainsprings and pass away, and he knew that they were only toys and would never turn into anything. For nursery magic is very strange and wonderful, and only those playthings that are old and wise and experienced, like the Skin Horse, understand about it. "What is real?" asked the rabbit one day when they were laying side by side near the nursery door, before Nana came in to tidy the room. "Does it mean having things that buzz inside you and a stick-out handle?" "Well, real isn't how you are made," said the Skin Horse. "It's a thing that happens to you. When a child really loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real." "Well, does it hurt?" asked the rabbit. "Sometimes," said the Skin Horse, for he was always truthful. "When you are real, though, you don't mind being hurt." "Does it happen all at once, like being wound up?" he asked, "or little by little?" "It doesn't happen all at once," said the Skin Horse. You just become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't often happen to people who break things easily or have sharp edges, or who have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off, and your eyes drop out, and you get loose in the joints, and pretty shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you are real, you can't be ugly, except to people who don't understand. I suppose you are real, said the rabbit. And then he wished he hadn't said it, for he thought the skin horse might be sensitive. But the skin horse only smiled. The boy's uncle made me real, he said. That was a great many years ago. But once you are real, you can't become unreal again. It lasts for always. The rabbit sighed. He thought it would be a long time before this magic called real happened to him. He longed to become real, to know what it felt like. And yet the idea of growing shabby and losing his eye and his whiskers was rather sad. He wished that he could become it without these uncomfortable things happening to him. There was a person called Nana who ruled the nursery. Sometimes she took no notice of the playthings laying around, and sometimes, for no reason whatever, she went swooping about like a great wind and hustled them away in cardboards. She called this tidying up, and all the playthings hated it, especially the tin ones. The rabbit didn't mind it so much, for wherever he was thrown, he came down soft. One evening when the boy was going to bed, he couldn't find the china dog that he always slept with. Nana was in a hurry, and it was simply too much trouble to hunt for a china dog at bedtime. So she simply looked about her, and seeing that the toy cupboard door stood open, she made a swoop. Here, she said, take your old bunny. He'll do to sleep with you. And she dragged the rabbit out by one ear and put him into the boy's arms. That night, and for many nights after that, the Velveteen Rabbit slept in the boy's bed. At first he found it rather uncomfortable, for the boy hugged him very tightly, and sometimes he rolled over on him, and sometimes he pushed him so far under the pillow that the rabbit could scarcely breathe. And he missed, too, those long moonlight hours in the nursery when all the house was quiet and his talks with the skin horse took place. But very soon he grew to like it, for the boy used to talk to him and made nice tunnels for him under the bedclothes that he said were like burrows for the real rabbits. And they played splendid games together in whispers when Nana had gone away to have her supper. And she had left the nightlight burning on the mantelpiece. When the boy dropped off to sleep, the rabbit would snuggle down close under his warm chin and dream, with the boy's hands clasped close around him all night long. And so time went on, and the little rabbit was very happy, so happy that he never noticed how his beautiful velveteen fur was getting shabbier and shabbier, and his tail was coming unsewn, and all the pink rubbed off his nose where the boy had been kissing him. Spring came, and they had long days in the garden, for wherever the boy went, the rabbit went too. He had rides in the wheelbarrow and picnics on the grass, and the lovely fairy huts built for him under the raspberry canes behind the flower border. And once, when the boy was called away suddenly to go out to tea, Rabbit was left on the lawn until long after dark, and Nana had to come and look for him with the candle, because the boy couldn't go to sleep unless he was there. He was wet with dew and quite earthy from diving into the burrow that the boy had made for him in the flower bed, and Nana grumbled as she rubbed him off with the corner of her apron. "You must have your old bunny," she said. "Fancy all that fuss for a toy." But the boy sat up in bed and stretched out his hands. "Give me my bunny," he said. You mustn't say that. He isn't a toy. He's real." When the little rabbit heard that, he was happy, for he knew that was what Skin Horse had said, and it was true at last. The nursery magic had happened to him, and he was no longer a toy. He was real. The boy had said it. That night, he was almost too happy to sleep, and so much love stirred in his little sawdust heart that it almost burst. And into his boot-button eyes, that had long ago lost their polish, there came a look of wisdom and beauty, so that even Nana noticed it in the morning when she picked him up. She said, "I declare, if that old bunny hasn't got quite a knowing expression." That was a wonderful summer. Near the house where they lived was a wood, and in the long June evenings the boy liked to go there after tea to play. He took the Velveteen Rabbit with him, and before he wandered off to pick flowers or play at a game among the trees, he always made the little rabbit a nice nest somewhere in the wood where he would be quite cozy, for he was a kind-hearted little boy, and he liked his bunny to be comfortable. One evening, while the rabbit was lying there alone, watching the ants that ran back and forth between his velvet paws, he saw two strange beings creep out of the tall grass near him. They were rabbits like himself, but quite furry and brand new. They must have been very well made, for their seams didn't show at all, and they changed shape in an unusual way when they moved. One minute they were long and thin, and the next minute they were fat and bunchy, instead of always staying the same, the way he did. Their feet patted softly on the ground, and they crept quite close to him, twitching their noses, while the rabbit stared hard to see which side of the clockwork stuck out, for he knew that people who jump generally have something to wind them up. But he couldn't see it. They were evidently a new kind of rabbit altogether. They stared at him, and the little rabbit stared back. And all that time, their noses twitched. "Why don't you get up and play with us?" one of them asked. "I don't feel like it," said the rabbit, for he didn't want to explain that he had no clockwork. "Huh," said the furry rabbit. "It's as easy as anything." He gave a big hop sideways and stood on his hind legs. "I don't believe you can." "I can," said the little rabbit. "I can jump higher than anything." He meant when the boy threw him, but of course he didn't want to say that. "Can you hop on your hind legs?" asked the furry rabbit. That was a dreadful question, for the Velveteen Rabbit had no hind legs at all. The back of him was made all in one piece, like a pincushion. He sat still in the grass and hoped the other rabbits wouldn't notice. "I don't want to," he said again. But the wild rabbits have very sharp eyes, and this one stretched out his neck and looked and looked. "He hasn't got any hind legs," he called out. "Fancy a rabbit without any hind legs." And he began to laugh. "I have," cried the little rabbit. "I have got hind legs. I am sitting on them." "Then stretch them out and show me, like this," said the wild rabbit, and he began to whirl around and dance till the little rabbit got quite dizzy. "I don't like dancing," the little rabbit said. "I'd rather sit still." But all he was feeling all during that while was a longing to dance, for a funny new tickly feeling ran through him, and he felt he would give everything in the world to be able to jump about like these rabbits did. The strange rabbit stopped dancing and came quite close. He came so close this time that his long whiskers brushed the Velveteen Rabbit's ear. Then he wrinkled his nose suddenly and flattened his ears and jumped backwards. "He doesn't smell right," he exclaimed. "He isn't a rabbit at all. He isn't real." "I am real," said the little rabbit. "I am real. The boy said so." And he nearly began to cry. Just then there were sounds of footsteps, and the boy ran past near them. With a stamp of feet and a flash of white tails, the two strange rabbits disappeared. "Come back and play with me," called the little rabbit. "Oh, do I come back? Please come back. I know I am real." But there was no answer. Only the little ants ran back and forth. And the grass swayed gently where the two strangers had passed. The Velveteen Rabbit was all alone. "Oh dear," he thought. "Why did they run away like that? Why couldn't they stop and talk to me?" For a long time he lay very still, watching the grass and hoping they would come back. But they never returned. And presently the sun came lower, and the little white moths fluttered out, and the boy came out and carried him home. Weeks passed, and the little rabbit grew very old and shabby. But the boy loved him just as much. He loved him so hard that he loved all his whiskers off, and the pink lining to his ears turned gray, and his brown spots faded. He even began to lose his shape, and he scarcely looked like a rabbit anymore. Except to the boy. To him, he was always beautiful, and that was all the little rabbit cared about. He didn't mind how he looked to other people, because the nursery magic had made him real. And when you are real, shabbiness doesn't matter. Then one day, the boy was ill. His face grew very flushed, and he talked in his sleep. And his little body was so hot that it burned when Rabbit was held close. Strange people came and went in the nursery, and a light burned all night and through the day. The little Velveteen Rabbit lay there, hidden from sight under the bed covers, and he never stirred, because he was afraid if they found him, someone might take him away, and he knew that the boy needed him. It was a long, weary time, for the boy was too ill to play, and the little rabbit found it rather dull with nothing to do all day. But he snuggled down patiently and looked forward to the time when the boy would be healthy again, and they would go out in the garden among the flowers and the butterflies and play splendid games in the raspberry thicket like they used to. All sorts of delightful things he planned. And while the boy lay half asleep, he crept up close to the pillow and whispered them in his ear. Presently the fever turned, and the boy started to get better. He was able to sit up in bed and look at picture books while the little rabbit cuddled close at his side. And one day they let him get up and get dressed. It was a bright sunny morning, and the windows stood wide open. They had carried the boy out onto the balcony, wrapped in a blanket, and the little rabbit lay tangled up among the bedclothes, thinking. The boy was going to the seaside tomorrow. Everything was arranged, and now it only remained to carry out the doctor's orders. They all talked about it while the little rabbit lay under the bedcovers with just his head peeking out, and he listened. The room had to be disinfected, and all the books and toys that the boys had played with must be gotten rid of. "Hurrah," thought the little rabbit. "Tomorrow we shall go to the seaside." For the boy had often talked about the seaside, and he wanted very much to see the big waves coming in, and the tiny crabs and the sand castles. Just then, Nana caught sight of him. "How about this old bunny?" she asked. "That," said the doctor. "Why, it's a mass of germs. We have to get rid of it." "What nonsense! Get him a new bunny. He mustn't have that one anymore because it has germs." And so the rabbit was put into a sack with old picture books and a lot of rubbish and carried out to the garden behind the house. It was a fine place to make a bonfire, only the gardener was too busy just then to attend to it. He had potatoes to dig and the green peas to gather, but the next morning he promised to come quite early and get rid of all of those things. That night the boy slept in a different bedroom, and he had a new bunny to sleep with. It was a splendid bunny, all white and plush with real glass eyes. But the boy was too excited to care very much about it, for tomorrow he was going to the seaside, and that in itself was such a wonderful thing that he couldn't think of anything else. And while the boy slept, dreaming of the seaside, the little rabbit lay among all of the old picture books in the corner behind the house. He felt very lonely. The sack of toys and things had been left untied, and so by wriggling a little bit, he was able to get his head through the opening and look out. He was shivering a little bit, for he was used to sleeping in a proper bed, and by this time his coat was worn so thin and was so threadbare from hugging that it wasn't any protection anymore. Nearby he could see the thicket of raspberries growing tall and close like a tropical jungle, in whose shadow he had played with the boy on many mornings. He thought of those long sunlit hours in the garden, how happy they were, and then a great sadness came over him. He seemed to see them all pass before them, each more beautiful than the other. The fairy huts in the flower bed, the quiet evenings in the wood where he lay in the grass and little ants ran over his paws, and the wonderful day when he first knew that he was real. He thought of the skin horse, so wise and gentle, and he thought of all that he had told him. Of what use was it to be loved and lose one's beauty and become real if it all ended like this? And a tear, a real tear, trickled down his little shabby velvet nose and fell to the ground. And then a strange thing happened, for where the tear had fallen, a flower grew out of the ground, a mysterious flower, not like any that grew in the garden. It had slender green leaves and was the color of emeralds, and in the center of the leaves, a blossom like a golden cup was there. It was so beautiful that the little rabbit forgot to cry, and he just laid there watching it. Presently, the blossom opened, and out of it stepped a fairy. She was quite the loveliest fairy in the whole world. Her dress was of pearls and dewdrops, and there were flowers around her neck and in her hair, and her little face was like the most perfect flower of all. She came close to the little rabbit and gathered him up in her arms and kissed him on his velveteen nose that was all damp from crying. "Little rabbit," she said, "don't you know who I am?" The little rabbit looked at her, and it seemed to him that he had seen her face before, but he couldn't remember where. "I am the nursery magic fairy," she said. "I take care of all the old playthings that the children have loved. When they are old and worn out and the children don't need them anymore, then I come and take them away with me and turn them into real." "Wasn't I real before?" asked the little rabbit. "You were real to the boy," the fairy said, "because he loved you so much. Now you shall be real to everyone." And she held the little rabbit close in her arms and flew with him into the woods. It was light now, for the moon had risen. All of the forest was beautiful, along with the grass. Everything shone like frosted silver. In the open glade between the tree trunks and the wild rabbits, they danced with their shadows on the velvet grass. But when they saw the fairy, they all stopped dancing and stood around in a ring to stare at her. "I've brought you a new playfellow," said the fairy. "You must be very kind to him and teach him all he needs to know in Rabbit Land, for he's going to live with you forever and ever." And she kissed the little rabbit again and put him down on the grass. "Run and play, little rabbit," she said. But the little rabbit sat quite still for a moment and never moved. For when he saw all the wild rabbits dancing around him, he suddenly remembered about his hind legs. And he didn't want them to see that he was made all in one piece. He did not know that when the fairy kissed him that last time that she had changed him altogether. And he might have sat there for a long time, too shy to move, if just then something hadn't tickled his nose, and before he thought what he was doing, he lifted his hind toe to scratch it. Then he found that he had actually gotten hind legs. Instead of a dingy velveteen, he had brown fur, soft and shiny. His ears twitched by themselves, and his whiskers were so long that they brushed on the grass. He gave one leap, and the joy of using those hind legs was so great that he went springing about the turf on them, jumping sideways and whirling around as the other did. And he grew so excited that when he at last did stop to look for the fairy, she had gone. He was a real rabbit at last, at home with the other rabbits. Autumn passed and winter, and in the spring, when the days grew warm and sunny, the boy went out to play in the woods behind the house. And while he was playing, 2 rabbits crept out from the grass and peeked at him. One of them was brown all over, but the other one had strange markings under his fur, as though long ago he had been spotted, and the spots still showed through. And about his little soft nose and his round black eyes there was something familiar, so that the boy thought to himself, "Why, he looks just like my old bunny that was lost when I was sick." But he never knew that it really was his own bunny that had come back to look at the child who had first helped him to be real. Boys and girls, that was a long story, but that is one of my favorite children's stories, and I hope you like it too. Many of you have a bunny or a bear or something that is your favorite toy. You stop and think about this story about the Velveteen Rabbit the next time you pick up your toy or hug your toy or take your toy to bed with you. Until I see you again, thank you, boys and girls.